going to talk to you a little bit about the Mirror exhibit. And I'm kind of going to give you a little bit of background of how and why I kind of came up with this concept and how I got to this exhibit, as opposed to just going right into the exhibition. So I have a background, obviously, in art history. My area of expertise started out as American art, and then it quickly delved into regional artists and also women artists. And my PhD is actually on 4 female artists in Taos, New Mexico in the 1920s and 30s, which was really a bummer because I had to go to Taos and Santa Fe to do research. It was so difficult. Although I did get snowed into Taos with 14 inches of snow when I was there. So anyways, there is a lot of recent scholarship and studies that have been done on women artists. And one of the things that you notice when you go to school, at least when I was in school, I think it's a little bit better now that Hannah and Rachel are a little bit younger than me, is that when you take an art history class, if you come across a female artist that they actually spend some time on, it's like a shock. You're like, oh my gosh, there's a female artist there. Like, and if I would ask my students when I'm teaching my women in art class, name some famous female artists, I would be lucky if I got 3. Can anybody name some female artists, famous ones that are from the past? Well, he's the first one. Georgia O'Keeffe? Mary Moses. Okay. Mary Cassatt. See, you guys are all educated. So much better than my students did. I usually got Georgia O'Keeffe, and then occasionally I would get, isn't there like a Frida somebody or other from Mexico? Right? So, this is also the first painting that I show my women in art class, usually, the first day of class. And I asked them to take a look at it. It's a portrait of the academicians of the Royal Academy, and it was painted in 1771. It is considered a group portrait, and if you notice, it's all men for the most part, right? So there are actually 2 women who are founding members of the Royal Academy, and they are seen. Right here and here. Right? So they're presented as these painted busts, and instead of showing their important role, they're on the wall. And so in this one painting, it kind of sets up my entire semester of teaching this class, because it tells you a lot of facts that can be ascertained and can be applied to the study of women in the arts. One is that the nude model, which you see also right here, is the basis for academic training and also the basis for representation in art. And it is the basis from the 16th century to the 19th century. And female artists were forbidden to draw, look, paint from a nude model. So they're already at one disadvantage because they're not able to do that. Male artists were given the opportunity to study the human form from live models, both male and female. And in this instance, the women aren't even participating in the class as students. Instead, they've been put on the wall kind of as decoration, right? So if you go back and look at photographs, which I was spending quite a bit of time looking for photographs last night, of drawing classes, and if you look at this one, where are the women? This is a female art class. What's different? The model has clothes on, right? So for a female artist to actually study from a human form, she had to look at plaster casts, which really isn't quite the same as the human form. So as I started doing a lot of research into some of the women artists that I've focused on, the other thing that's really hard to determine is their stylistic developments, the entire range of their production, and there's a reason why. Because 9 out of 10 times, their lives as a mother, as a wife, all kind of take over and kind of interferes with that ability to have that long, overarching career, right? There are some that do it. For instance, Georgia O'Keeffe never had kids. There are quite a few female artists who painted that There are quite a few that did get married that were really good. And when I was doing my research a long time ago, there was this one woman who I thought was amazing. Her name was Bessie Hoover Russell. She was from Cincinnati. And she got married and ended up promoting her husband's career instead of her own after she got married. So you see this a lot in the artwork. And then the other thing that you see is that art is often described in terms of masculine and feminine, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it really is a big deal if you're a female artist. So here is a painting by Berthe Morisot. She was one of the one of two impressionist painters in France. Mary Cassatt was the other one. And this is her painting, The Psyche. And what do you notice about it? Then you look at it's inside. It's inside, right? She's looking in a mirror. It's inside. It's an interior shot. This is Mary Cassatt's painting, Tea. What else do you notice about this painting? Also inside. It's an activity that women do. They take tea, right? In these two paintings, which one of these is by a female artist? None of them. That was a trick question. So the reason why is because in the 1800s in France and pretty much anywhere, if you were a respected middle class or upper class woman, you didn't go to the cafes. You didn't get to enjoy all these new entertainments that were happening around Paris, that like the shows and the cabarets and all that other stuff. The women that you see there are lower class, they're prostitutes, they're working women. The girl on the left, this is actually called the absence drinker. This is what that shows you as you drink too much, right? And the one on the right is actually a painting by an American artist who studied in Paris. His name was Ferdinand Lundgren, and it is also called In the Cafe. I thought for sure you guys would have said the one on the right, but because it's not quite as depressing as the one on the left, right? Oops, wrong way, sorry. What about these two paintings? Which one's by the female? This is not a trick question, there is one by a female. It's the one on the right. The one on the right is by Mary Cassatt. It's called In the Loge. The one on the left is an Edgar Degas painting. It's a cafe concert in France. And again, same instances. A woman, if she goes out for entertainment, goes to the opera. She sits in a loge. She's all dressed up. But what's really interesting about this painting is, see this guy here? What's he doing? He's looking at her. So she's always kind of this victim of the gaze, right? Even though she's trying to watch the show, somebody is watching her. And that's kind of what that's about. And then the Degas painting is a cafe, which again, the only reason why he painted that was because he was a male and he was able to go. If Mary Cassatt would have showed up there, her reputation would have been ruined. And so they were forced to paint what was familiar to them, which again is mothers and children. It's sisters taking tea. It's a girl looking in a mirror. It's a woman riding like out on a boat with a chaperone. All of those things, totally different expectations. So that brings us to the exhibit specifically. And it's just a little bit of a historical background that I wanted to give you to let you know that even artists today, female artists, still have a lot of the same obstacles that they've had all along. There are a lot of opportunities for them that weren't there before, but there's still a lot of things that get in the way. And during COVID, it became very apparent to me and a lot of my friends that we were reverting back to the female 9 out of 10 times was the one that quit the job, that stayed home, that took care of the mom or the parents, the kids, educated the kids, helped them with their schooling. It was usually the female, not always, but usually the female that ended up giving up that dream job or that thing that they wanted to do because that was their expectation. And so this exhibit, while it started before COVID, it actually really kind of came together during that period. And it really focuses on some female artists that use the idea of their identity not just as an artist, but as a woman, as a mother, as a daughter, as a friend, and it all reflects how they do their artwork. And in the past, in art history, if you were putting personal things onto a canvas or into a sculpture, it was considered weak. It was considered feminine. Men didn't do that. It wasn't a strong thing to do. But in this case, I think it's extremely strong and powerful work because it resonates with a lot of different people, not just females. It also can resonate with males. And so there was a lot of artists that I looked at for this exhibition. There were two artists that gave me the idea for the exhibition. The first one is this one. This is Erin Holscher-Almazan. She was born in North Dakota, and she actually lives in Dayton, Ohio. She teaches at the University of Dayton, where she teaches printmaking and drawing. And her stuff is very autobiographical in some respects, in that she's always kind of figuring out what's going on in her life through drawing. And so at one time, she had a bunch of her friends get together, and they had refreshments, cake, drinks, and she just drew them, interacting over and over and over again. And then she transformed them into these prints. And the unusual thing about these prints is the wolf heads, right? So what is the one thing that we constantly hear about? You know, we're our worst enemies. We tear people down to get to the top. That's what is expected of us if we want to succeed in the business world. And so at times, we can be the most encouraging, comforting, supportive person ever to our friends, to our sisters. But at other times, we're our strictest competition, right? And so that's what she's trying to show you in these pieces. This one is called Eat or Be Eaten. So it kind of tells you what she's thinking. Julie Blackman is a photographer who grew up in Springfield, Missouri. All of her artwork is inspired by her experience of growing up as the oldest of 9 children, including 5 sisters. I can't imagine. 6 girls in a house. I hope they had a couple bathrooms. She says she calls it a generic American town in the middle of the United States. That's what she calls Springfield, Missouri. And so her photographs kind of look at past paintings, past artists, a lot of Dutch genre scenes, and they're always kind of like this fun little play on what is going on. And so the photograph on the left has the same title as a very famous Grant Wood painting called American Gothic. But this one is of a family, and the kid's, you know, upside down. And then if you look at the picture over here, she has it again on the wall. She calls it family portrait. The mom's running out the door in high heels. The kids are, I don't know what they're doing. They're like, you know, not behaving. And I would do an entire show on her if I could. I mean, her stuff is just really, it just really resonates with you. Alicia Brown was born in St. Anne, Jamaica. She is now living in Sarasota, Florida. And I got to listen to her talk at a symposium a few months ago when the exhibit was in Worcester. And she talked about how she came from a very small town in the mountains, and then she moved down to the bigger city, and it was like this big shock for her to be there. And she would walk around trying to look for inspiration, and she would see all these women out on the streets getting dolled up and, you know, fixing each other's hair, doing each other's makeup, you know, just getting really flamboyant. And she said she sat on the sidelines for a really long time until she finally felt confident enough to, like, have them fix her hair or, like, see what they were doing. And it's all about assimilation and about the fact that it is a Caribbean country, but yet there's all these British traditions that are still there. And so these women put on a face, they put on dress, all to kind of be more powerful, to kind of like go out into the world and kind of hide their true identities. And the other thing that she pointed out about the collars, which if you look at Dutch paintings, the bigger and fancier your cuff was, the more wealthy you were. But the way that she looks at it is it cuts off the head from the body, and it disassociates you. And so you might be pretending to be one way when you're actually a different way on the inside. And so she kind of takes it one step further. Jessica Calderwood, who is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, is now teaching at Ball State University in Indiana. She has an emphasis on metalworking now. She also has worked in ceramics. So this picture, this one here is big, like the two pieces that are in the exhibit, and these two are small, like the other two pieces in the exhibit. She really liked working big, but then trying to get it from place to place for exhibits got a little expensive and difficult. So she kind of started to go smaller scale, which these sell like hotcakes out of the galleries that she's represented in. I had to like beg her not to sell the one that's in the show. I'm like, can you please not sell public-private for 2 years because I really, really want that one. But a lot of times too, you know, talking about the role of women in art, talking about the role of a woman who might have one way of presenting herself to the world that isn't really what she's feeling on the inside. And all of hers deal a lot with expectations of women. I love the title Ivory Tower, which I really wanted that one too, but it's sold, so I couldn't get it. The one on the right is called Seedy Woman. The one in the gallery that is my favorite is called Reluctant Sex Plot. Happy to explain that to any of you who need an explanation later. I've had to do that twice now. But again, kind of showing that, you know, you present yourself one way to the world, but it's not necessarily who you are, right? Or how you feel you're navigating it. It's like a mask that you're putting on. Kristen Cliffel was the other artist that gave me the idea for the exhibition along with Erin's work. I had them in another exhibit of mine. Kristen is from Cleveland. She's living in Lakewood, Ohio right now. Hannah and them got to meet her because one of her pieces was damaged, so she had to come in and fix it before the opening. And she's a really good friend of mine. I would say that I've known her forever, but it's really only been 12 years, but I feel like I've known her forever. And her work is very much autobiographical. It very much is how she works out things that she's going through. She has sketchbooks of things that are happening in her life that she records that then are recreated into pieces. And so, for instance, this casting a long shadow was the piece that she did when they were moving out of their house in Cleveland that she raised her kids in and downsizing to a smaller house in Lakewood. Both of her kids were moving out, and she was having a really hard time with it because that house, you know, had been part of their lives for so long. This one was done during COVID. Does it need an explanation? Not really, right? And so very much a part of that process. And so the pieces in the gallery, you'll see two with rabbits. There's a very great story with Kristen where her son found some rabbits that were going to be killed and he brought them home and they kept procreating and she had rabbits all over the place and she's like, there was just rabbits everywhere. She said, so what was I going to do? I just started drawing them. And then they became part of her artwork because they were there. She likes birds really well. Birds are often showing up in her work. The big piece of What Kind of Mother Are You? That's called Roll Call. Was created after she had a really bad day of running the kids to soccer and dance and, you know, had a problem at the studio and, you know, her mom needed something and she came home and she was throwing dinner together and her son walked in and he said, really? That's what you're making? What kind of mother are you anyway? And she said, oh, that's a really good title. Hold on a second. And she went and she wrote it down. And then she came back and kind of gave him heck about it. But if you look at it, it shows you Mother Goose, right? The mother that reads you bedtime stories. It shows you the bear, you know, the big protective mama bear, right? You know, he'll do anything to protect those kids. And then there's the woman with the crown on her head and the mask face. And that is all the times that you pretend like you got it all together when you really don't, but you're letting people think that you do. And so that's what that's about as well. So hers is very autobiographical. Rebecca Cross is an artist who works in the traditional techniques of Japanese shibori, which is a shape and color resistant immersion dye process. And so she creates out of silk these really interesting wall installations, these three-dimensional sculptures. Her daughter died when she was 18, I believe. And so her group of friends, her group of women artists that she kind of like relies on have become her support group. And so all of her artwork is a reflection of them. And it's inspired by them. And so like if you look at the name, you'll see that the one on the right is called Cora's Meadow Suite. It's named after somebody who's a very close friend of hers. And that is kind of how she has managed to kind of keep moving forward with her career and with her art. Lala Asani is a Moroccan artist who now lives in New York City. And I want to thank the Columbus Museum of Art and also a private collector, Nanette Mason-Juice, who's speaking next month for the pieces in the exhibition. She is very famous and very hard to get in touch with, so I was very lucky that I knew where there were pieces close by to borrow. Because I thought that her work is very evocative of the role of women in a different culture, right? She uses a lot of Islamic calligraphy, overlaps that over representations of the female body. She's looking at that Arab female identity, which usually needs to be completely covered. And she's returning to her Moroccan girlhood in a lot of her work. She's looking back on it as an adult woman that's caught somewhere between the past and the present. And as an artist, she's kind of looking at different ways to speak. And if you look at her artwork, writing is a very masculine pursuit, as is the tattooing. And so she's using that within her feminine bodies as well. Jessica is one of the, Gardner's one of the younger artists in the exhibit. Her and Alicia are probably the two youngest. And hers is all about being a mom, a young mom of two, and teaching college, and wondering if she's doing a good job or not. She lives in Virginia. She teaches at the Northern Virginia Community College. The one on the left is Sleep When the Baby Sleeps. I've never had kids, but my sister has had kids, and I know that that's something. Oh, baby's taking a nap, I should sleep, right? Am I right? The other one is, the exhibit is called Mommy Wars. And again, just kind of exploring how she was dealing with trying to juggle all of these things at once and wondering if she was doing a good job, and using her artwork to kind of explain it. Marcelle Hackbart is a visual artist and photographer. She's a curator. She teaches at Kenyon College in Danbury, Ohio. And what was interesting about Marcelle is I had never heard of her, and she's from Ohio. She's more well known outside of Ohio than she actually is in Ohio, which I find kind of unusual. And so this one was also very much reflective of what was happening during COVID in some ways. So she had started this series about these rooms, and she would get usually women to pose for her as she would take photographs and kind of talk about the space that they're in. You know, tower, when you think of a tower, I don't know, I think of Rapunzel, right? And Locked Away. Well, during COVID, she couldn't have anybody pose for her. So she had to learn how to do it herself. So these then became self-portraits of her acting out the scenes that normally she would have somebody else do for her. And kind of talking about the different spaces that women inhabit, whether it's a good space or not, a happy space, not a happy space. There's one in the gallery called Nursery that is really strong, that I've had a lot of people kind of stand there and comment on. Mavi Ponce de Leon was born in Argentina. She's lived in Mexico. She teaches at Bexley High School in Columbus. She does a lot of different work. She's very much influenced by culture, by maps, by location, by origins. She says she constantly feels like she's living in two places but isn't from either because of her background. And she just completed her PhD in art history at the Ohio State University this past year, so if you ever see her, you should congratulate her. But a lot of her work deals also with her own issues. And some of the paintings that or pieces that we have in the exhibit, we don't have this series up now, but the other one that's similar actually has the DNA of her kids in the pieces. she worked on them when she was pregnant, and like was really just kind of working away with it. And if you meet Bobby, she's shorter than me, unless she wears her 4-inch heels, and then she's almost as tall as me. Tiniest woman you ever see, and you're like, how did you have a kid? Exactly. Because she's very tiny. But again, very much intertwining these cultures and stuff with her work. Bellamy Prince is another artist from Cleveland. She was born and raised in New York City. She describes herself as an only child of only children. And so what that means is that her mom and dad gave her all the family photographs, hundreds and hundreds of family photographs, which she has now started to go through. And she takes them and she recreates them into monoprints and her own artwork. And so it's very much about her history, her ties to her mom, to her grandma, to her family members. She actually, the 3 pieces on the one smaller wall in the gallery are actually her grandmother, her mother, and herself. And so it kind of talks about, that tradition, that idea of capturing that family history and that close connection. Stephanie Rond is actually known as a mural artist. She received her bachelor's from The Ohio State University. She lives in Columbus. The Mirror Mirror exhibit was the first time she was ever invited to show in an exhibition that she didn't submit for a jury piece, so she was very excited. She's my age. I know, very young. But she is known internationally for her mural work. And this ghost girl, the girl in blue, is kind of her motto. It's kind of her piece. It's the one that shows up everywhere and kind of like is exploring different issues. This one is called What Does Home Look Like? What are these different things that mean home? How do you fit into home? There's one that says, what does it mean to be free, right? So they all kind of incorporate that idea of trying to fit into that space. And then Margot Selsky is from Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was raised in Kentucky. She didn't start painting, she said, until she went to college. And she has 3 children. She's a mother of 3. She stayed home to raise them, so she was, a stay-at-home mom. And she says that her fairy tale universe depicts her family's secrets in a very tightly balanced, sort of occasionally her own children dressed in these very elaborate clothing. And the reason why I was drawn to her work is that sort of fairy tale look to them at first, right? That idea, I grew up reading fairy tales. Of course, I read Disney, but also Grimm, which always usually has a bad ending, right? As opposed to Disney's happy ending. And it's just kind of like these fairy tale worlds, and then as you look closer, there's things that maybe will remind you of something that you read or something that you experienced, which is why I really liked her work as well. And she was quite thrilled to be in the exhibit. She was one of the first ones to respond and actually paid to have her work shipped. So that's how excited she was to be in the exhibition. And then there's Babette Wainwright. She was born and raised in Haiti. She began painting very colorful market women at the age of 9. She was sent to the United States in the late 1950s to escape the oppressive regime of Papa Doc Boulay. And so she didn't have training necessarily, but she would paint her childhood memories just to kind of keep that connection to her home place. And her work tends to reflect the power and beauty of women within her African culture. She now lives in Madison, Wisconsin, and she has taught a lot of workshops and stuff there. And she kind of uses play and kind of these connections to this African and Haitian culture in her artwork, and a lot of it has to do with motherhood, welcoming, holding, and the size of her work, a lot of them is like the size of a baby that you would hold in your arms. They're very personal extensions of herself. And so that is the, that is the artists that are in the exhibit. It's kind of just a really high-end highlight of some of the thought process that went into why they were